Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being a show where it's about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season premiere of Prodigal Son. A great season premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, we're picking up months after the events of the season 1 finale, and I like that we immediately don't. I think it's actually interesting that we don't immediately pick up afterwards, because we're actually just kind of seeing the ramifications of it, like Malcolm kind of having sit with a lot of that stuff and just kind of the after effects. And then later in the episode, then we kind of find out exactly what happens. Because I think the first thing that came up was actually they found Epcot's body Malcolm is corrects his mom and saying it was in Estonia. So it is a thing of to everyone else, life is going back to normal except for Malcolm, because he's the only one. The only people who know what went down in that room is him and Ainsley. And I figured as much. I knew his mom, they would never tell their mom about what happened. But interestingly enough, obviously Malcolm is constantly throwing himself into cases. I feel like even more so than usual. Because even Danny's taken notice of that, because she's always kind of very aware of what's going on with Malcolm to a certain extent. But it's obviously Gil at the very least understands Malcolm throws himself into cases to be sane, but it's even Danny was realizing out of 10 he's at an 11. Obviously that whole catching that killer at the beginning, I'm like, oh, you actually still have the knife, hence why you're smiling. I love him being my dad's kind of in my head. He's might have heard of my dad, Martin Whitley, the surgeon. And the dude's like, holy shit. He's like, yeah, I know. But luckily, they were connected by a harness or whatever. And I love this. You were supposed to wait for us to anchor you. It's well, you must have anchored us. And Teresa get on that. She's I dabbled in this ain't her exact word, but it was kind of in the veins of I dabbled in bondage stuff or whatever back in Hoboken. So I'm good with knots. And you have JT giving her that look what? It's every time he turns around, he's learning something weird about Idrissa or Malcolm. It's I'm surrounded by weirdos. But at the same time, Malcolm gets the call from his dad while he's literally got a dude hanging over the edge. And it's all right. And he's oh, my boy, I'm happy to hear from you. He's I got some great news. He's please tell me it's cancer. He's I'm coming home soon. Wait, what did you say? And Malcolm's wait, what do you mean? He's well, I'm not coming home, but I'm going back to where I was previously. Now I was previously in Gym Pop, but now I get to go back to my comfy little cell. Isn't that great? Yeah, I really got to go, Dad. So... Because talking with his dad again is a reminder, because obviously we, see that he had a conversation with Ainsley. Ainsley, obviously we know, did the deed, but Malcolm covered it up. Because Ainsley snapped out a bit of the, doing what she did, she had a mind break where she committed that murder, and then she was wait, what happened? Because she kind of blacked out. But Malcolm's you didn't do anything, Ainsley, I did. And in her mind, it's you did what you did to protect our family. So, and that's the sad thing, because she's are you okay, Malcolm? Because in her mind, it's her mind kind of was already well, if anyone was going to do it, it was going to be my brother. But obviously he did it out of protecting us. So it's it's okay at the end of the day. But I think there is a part of Ainsley that knows she did it, but she doesn't want to accept it. And Malcolm thinks he's doing the right thing by protecting Ainsley like that. I think he's doing the exact opposite. But granted, he knew that if he let things play out, if he didn't protect his sister, it's because I think it's easy. It's I should be the one that takes on that burden. Because obviously, Ainsley was super young when everything went down with their dad. Obviously, Malcolm was old enough for it to sink into his mind. And which isn't to take away, Ainsley's got her own issues. A lot of stuff over season 1 showed us her issues, her dabbling in that darkness that Malcolm is so trying to spent so much of his life trying to get away from. Ainsley kind of dives deeper into it. Even though with his being the nature of his life, Malcolm does dive deeper into that being a criminal psychology. But you get what I'm trying to say. But for Ainsley, I think I get the feeling she knows, and I think it's going to cause her some issues. Just like Malcolm's been having nightmares most of his life, I think Ainsley's going to start having some too, because her brain is going to try and process the truth. It's blocked out now, but eventually something's going to trigger it and she's going to start remembering. And Malcolm might have done her a disservice, because now handling this on her own, knowing what Malcolm sacrificed for her, who knows what kind of effect I'll have on her in the long run. Maybe Malcolm outweighed it by being this is the better option. My sister gets to stay innocent. She doesn't go away from this. I'm the one that will carry this burden, so... it's just a fascinating dynamic that that's why I thought it was so interesting for them to cut to like months later, because I was like, how are you going to resolve that? Like I thought like, but it's like Ainsley doesn't remember, so for her it doesn't, there's no like her kind of necessarily living with it. Like I said, for now, not unless she's feigning ignorance, because that could play an angle into it where it's like, yeah, she's feigning ignorance and letting Malcolm take all of that when she knows deep down, but maybe she just doesn't want to accept. There's a lot of angles they can go through with this thing, and I'm excited to see kind of, where they end up taking it. But the main overarching case this episode is, because, Malcolm's like, I need to jump into a new case. And that new case involves a woman named Millicent, who was murdered. And at first it's like, okay, so how was she killed? And, Idrissa shows up. It's like, the Dries knows. And she's like, or Idrissa, she's like, do you think I need a nickname? Because I liked it, but now that I'm saying it out loud, it sounds weird. And then I love JT being like, I can fire both of them, right? Because he's the one kind of running things now. Because even Ainsley was getting an interview from him earlier in the episode. And he's just so stiff. Even at one point, I thought he was trying to wink. I think he was just, his eye was twitching. His right eye was twitching. I was like, oh. And it's just like, oh, when is Gil getting back? Because JT's kind of not the pizzazz we're looking for on camera. But nevertheless, it turns out Millicent was decapitated. And I honestly, from like whatever effects they used, that looked so seamless. When it's just like, oh, everything's normal, and you pull ahead, and you see the mark. I'm like, oh. And then it's like, for this mark to be so precise, it has to be, because they eventually find out that she was killed by, and I've always said guillotine. It's guillotine, but I've always said guillotine, so it's kind of a hard habit. But she was killed by a guillotine. But obviously Malcolm and Idris are nerding out about it, like, oh my, look at this cut. It's so clean, so seamless, so obviously whoever did this was an executioner. But it turns out, like, because Millicent was married to, like, what was it, some Texas rich dude, I forgot what his whole thing was. And her husband died, but then like there was a servant that was accused of killing him and went to jail. And we actually find out later on ended up getting executed. His name was Diego. But not too many people have guillotines, because Malcolm's like, yeah, most of them were destroyed in like France in like 81. And he was like, the only one that he knew, at least in the New York area, was in 96. And they're kind of looking at him like, JT's looking like, why do you know that? And Idris is almost like smiling like, oh my God, it's so cool that you know that. And he's like, come on, you guys know I collect, murder weapons and, ephemeral. He's like, that's not weird. JT's like, yes, it's super weird. Also, I love that, like, Idrissa was there for that part where it's like they were talking to Natalie, Millicent's lawyer. And I love that she was like, oh my God, so you think that her new boyfriend killed her husband? And then JT kind of turns to her. She's like, I'm sorry, I'm usually not here for this part of the investigation. So it's just like, Idrissa continues to be my spirit animal. I adore Idrissa so much, dude. I cannot gush enough about her, because I did a lot of gushing about Idrissa in season 1. God, she's just so adorable and amazing. I love it. They end up finding the one dude who had the guillotine. Well, after Malcolm had to visit his dad, which his dad is back, he's like, oh, I'm ready to get back to normal and everything. And it's like, oh, I have a new roommate. It's like, oh, when Malcolm it's like, hey, Malcolm, Jerry's over there making noise. It's like, who's that? Oh, that's my new roommate, Jeremy. There you go. Good one, Jer. Good one. I'm in hell. Hell. It's so interesting. But obviously they're having their like back and forth and stuff, because obviously, and I love how much of a child Martin can be sometimes. He acts like such a spoiled brat that doesn't get what he wants, So for him being like, Malcolm's like, I need your help. And he's like, I'm not feeling it. What? Because you and me, we haven't had an honest conversation about everything that went down, because Martin's the one that led him through, like, hey, disposing of the body and stuff like that. It's like, you need to worry about the blood later. Disposing of the body comes first. He's the one that led him through that. But it's like, we haven't even talked. And it's like, Estonia, it's like, how did you even accomplish it? It's like, we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about this case. He's like, fine. He's like, ugh, if you want to be all about it like that, fine. Let me write down the name of someone who most likely has the guillotine that you're looking for. It ended up being a dude named, well, I love that Jerry kicked his shoe at Malcolm. Really, before that, I love the whole, like, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, Jerry, we were disturbing you. He's like, shh, meet, yeah, right, back to it. Even being like, oh, don't worry. Hey, Jerry, I think Wiley's going to get him this time. I think the Coyote's going to get him this time. But Jerry had thrown his shoe and it hit Malcolm, and Malcolm ended up leaving. He's like, no, don't go. And he's like, Jerry, you shouldn't have done that, Jerry Bear. And then ends up later on trying to electrocute him and kill him. He's like, I'm sorry about this, Jerry. And then lo and behold, he didn't actually kill Jerry. He actually healed him because he's like, whoa, I can actually talk and say what I need to say. And even Martin be like, I was planning on killing you. I should have ended up helping you. And then later on, he's talking about the fact is that he's recommending electrotherapy. And it's like, yeah, I kind of actually saved his life. Because even Martin was like, that was a miracle. It's like, it is. I should have talked about it when I did my Nerdbo. I just felt like it probably would have been weird to mention it. But this show is, in a effed up way, it's kind of funny. And it's just like, They have to on purposely be writing some of this stuff in a weird, funny way. There's a dark sense of humor that this show has, like, I love. Especially with just some of the stuff Martin does. Like, especially him being like, wow, I was trying to kill you, but, I actually made you better. Oh, wow. Because he even talked about while he was in Gen Pop, he actually helped out because he helped kind of prevent COVID from spreading. I did that was neat that you kind of have to. It is, because that was also the conversation, like, how many shows were going to acknowledge everything that's going on, and obviously this show is. This is one of those shows obviously going to acknowledge everything that's going on from the pandemic to just the racist shit that's going down too. We'll get to that soon enough. But regardless, circling back to like the main case, they end up finding Boyd, Millicent's boyfriend, kind of entombed because while they're alive, like locking him behind like a brick wall and stuff like that. And it turns out like, he's kind of out of his mind because he's dehydrated and, stuff. And he's looking at Malcolm as like, you're a killer. And he's like, you got it all over you. And because periodically throughout the episode, like Malcolm has kind of looked in reflections and he sees this sinister grin on his face. And it's just kind of like him thinking of like, I'm this killer. Because it's something he's denied so long. It's like my dad is the serial killer. That's not me. It's always, whether he's outwardly admitted it or not, it has always been a concern. But I think he's wanted to believe that he was better than his dad, that he was nothing like his dad. But after how that whole situation ended, like it made him confront, like, I might be more like my dad than I want to admit. I think your sister's a lot more like your dad than you or anyone would want to ever admit either. Because he's the one that everyone's worried about. No one's ever worried about Ainsley, which, once again, that's potentially an issue. But, Malcolm kind of goes a little sinister, puts on the gloves and everything. It's like, what kind of music do you think Iggy listens to in his little sex dungeon here? Turns up the music and he's like dancing a little bit. He gets stuff whipping. He's like, you know what? I'm not a whipping, flogging type of guy. He's like, but this is awesome. And starts, like a nail gun. And it's like, admit it, like why this is happening to you. Because he's like, I'm not a killer. I'm a justice killer. But ends up eventually getting Boyd to admit that they did, in fact, kill Millicent's husband. And their greatest crime was the fact that they pinned it on that servant, Diego. And Diego ended up getting executed because it was Texas, And so it turns out they're responsible. And then they end up finding out that Natalie, Millicent's lawyer, is actually Diego's sister. So obviously it looks like she's guilty of it, but she knew, like, she came all the way to New York and everything so she could get close to Millicent so she could find some proof that they were the ones responsible. She wanted to get justice for her brother. But then it's like, justice for her would have been clearing her brother's name, not just getting revenge. So she's not that type of justice, Whoever this is was someone that might have been connected to the case, but then it clicked in Malcolm's brain. The actual executioner, because they executed someone that was innocent. Like, I guess you could, in that line of work, I'm sure you could probably think like, you're doing something good. I'm killing vile scum of the world. But then you find out, wait, I killed someone innocent. Someone else fell to, my execution and they were innocent, and that kind of weighs on you. So they put out, the report and everything to be like, hey, we got Natalie. We know she's the one that's really behind this. Sending out a false, report so that the real killer would come, because he wouldn't want, because that'd be injustice for Natalie to take the fall for. Lo and behold, later on, he shows up at Malcolm's place, and obviously he's kept an eye on Malcolm because Malcolm is like, we knew this would draw you out and everything, but he's like, I know what kind of justice killer you are. It doesn't fit your profile. You'll never hurt me. He's like, well, I know that you went to see your dad. I've been following you. So it's like, you're a lot more like your dad than you would want anyone to ever admit. And Malcolm's like, that is something I have to accept. I've tried to run away from it, deny it, that my dad is my dad. He will always be a part of me. And that's always been something he's afraid of, that he's a lot more like his dad than he thinks. And more recent events made him think so. So in his mind, the killer thought like, oh, I do just, he's like, I'll make it swift, because even Malcolm's like, I can't deny it. You'd probably be doing the world a little bit of service by taking me out. But Malcolm's defending himself with a scimitar, and he was like, all right, I lied. I'm actually pretty damn good with a scimitar. Luckily defends himself. And then even Danny coming in with her gun pointed, put down a weapon. He doesn't have a weapon. She's like, no, Malcolm, I'm talking to you. Because she saw how crazy he's been this episode. That in itself, that in its entirety is actually kind of interesting to me in many different regards because of Danny's reaction to Malcolm this episode in regard to obviously Jessica and Gil, obviously that was a thing last season, and obviously she's come visit him, left letters and stuff like that, and Danny kind of picked up on it, and then Danny talks to Gil about it later on, being like, you aren't who yourself when you're around her. And he's like, what are you talking about? It's like, yeah, you have feelings for her. She's special to you. You care about her. But the fact is that you got yourself in this situation. I'm not saying you got stabbed and it was your fault, but it was because you were playing the role of a hero. You weren't thinking like a detective. You put yourself in that situation and that led to that. It's like, but for him, it's like he does care about Jessica, and it's like, he feels bad because that family has been through hell. They, it's like even his, previous wife, Jackie, he's like, even she said that maybe that, the Bright family is cursed, and maybe they are. And, Jessica's hearing all that. And it's so, because obviously she dressed up like, she hasn't really, the last person she was with ended up being like, oh, he ended up being a sociopath, killer, the one kind of responsible for a lot of terrible stuff. So, yeah, so Gil's, because obviously even before then, there was something between Jessica and Gil already, but, it's like they both kind of opened that door to let something happen, and it's like, but now Jessica's hearing that, and it's like, now it kind of changes everything, because it's like, Gil isn't the best version of himself, he's letting his emotions and feelings for her impede his detective work. It's like, you could have died because of you going above and beyond for her. And it's like, I'm just telling you to be careful, And I always think that, I thought that was kind of interesting, and maybe, not necessarily ironic, maybe even hypocritical to a certain extent. But then I thought, because there's obviously something between Danny and Malcolm. There's something there. But you also have to complicate that too by being the fact is that, well, Danny's the first friend Malcolm's had probably his entire life, in a very, very long time. He's never been friends with anyone, but this is probably, Danny's the first friend he's ever really had, but obviously last season kind of painted it like there might be a little bit more, but Danny's never really necessarily gone that far, because I guess, whereas Gil kind of has gotten too close to the family, Danny's kind of kept her distance to a certain extent. But even, because to be fair, I was about to say the dude was trying to kill Malcolm, she rushed up there alone, but to be fair, she was acting more as a cop and not just playing the role of hero, so it's a little different. Plus, backup was on the way, so it's not like she was going on alone. So that's why I was like, there's levels of this. You almost feel like there might be hypocrisy to it, but Danny might be talking from a place of, I know how you feel because I care about Malcolm, but I'm able to kind of separate things. I'm not getting too close to the family, because she sees that Malcolm's not just he's pretty much a mess. And that's a lot, that family's mess up in many different regards. I just thought that was such a fascinating aspect to that whole thing. So that's why I started off thinking, oh, she's a little hypocritical, isn't she? But I've kind of pulled that back now, talking it out kind of made me go, I should probably pull back on that. Well, we'll see kind of where things kind of go from that front. But another angle to this episode was those cops pulling up on JT like that. He was like, whoa. I called him for the backup, and you're treating me. And that dude was pushing JT against the wall, kind of choking him out with his baton. But then JT pushed him back. And it's they're telling him, hands up, hands up. Danny and Malcolm had to be like, whoa, he's a cop. Danny shows her badges, he's one of us. And it's for JT, it's shit. It's because even Danny has said it, with everything going down, the pandemic, plus all the racism, it's like, it's not the best time to be a black cop. And JT, like, getting shit for that. Because even him, and that's the sad thing, at the end of the day, he's like, shit, he's like, I know how this is all going to go down. They're going to say that I assaulted him because it's going to be all of their words against JT. But it's like, no, like, you tell us what happened. It's like, Malcolm's like, you did nothing wrong. Danny's like, you tell us what happened and we'll have your back. But Gil is like, no, like, I will also have your back. Like, you're one of the best detectives. I'm seeing two of the best detectives I know around. And whatever Malcolm is, and Malcolm's looking like, wait, what? But you've been doing a fine job kind of running things in my absence. So you go home, you kiss your wife, and let her know you caught the bad guy. So I got your back when it comes to this. That's good. That means obviously Gil was kind of pushing himself to kind of, through his recovery. So we're going to see how that ends up playing out over the course of the season. But then Malcolm visits his dad at the end, and it's like his dad being like, I get it, you holding this burden. It's like, come closer, son, and shakes his hand. It's like, thank you for doing what you did. You saved your sister, and don't ever feel guilty because you did that. You saved her, and that should be what you focus on. But it's like, but that's not what's eating you away. What's actually eating you away is the fact is of how easy it was. The fact is walking around knowing, hey, I got away with it. And the fact is that what makes you feel bad is that you don't feel bad about it. That it actually felt good being able to get away with murder. Yeah, you didn't commit the murder, but you made sure that you are accomplice to it because you diced up the body. And even while he was slicing the body up, you saw Malcolm smile. And that's what he's been seeing in those reflections, like the entire episode, is that smile, and his dad had said it earlier in the episode, like father, like, and Malcolm stopped him and was like, don't. So, like I said, I think it's so interesting how they're pushing this narrative and continuing this as like Malcolm is, so much like his dad. I mean, to be fair, Malcolm's not actually killed someone. So Ainsley's got a one-up on him. Malcolm hasn't, has he? I'm trying to remember. It's been a while. I don't think there was anyone in season 1 he had to actually kill. I don't think. Well, Ainsley's kind of. I think so. I could be remembering wrong. He's never killed someone. I'd be fine with someone end up correcting me. I don't think he has, right? So Ainsley kind of has a one up on him in that regard. But I guess it's like he also, that was kind of in the moment, disposing of a body the way he did. Because we still don't even know how he managed to get it out of the country too. Into another country, so that's a whole thing within itself. So I think that, shows like, and that's Malcolm's worry that, like, once he's down this path, it was already a slippery slope before, it's gotten even slipperier. No, it's not a word, but you get what I'm trying to say. But, fascinating developments. Such a great premiere. I am so glad to have Prodigal Son back. I cannot wait to see what this season has in store for us. I cannot wait to see what goes down in the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and good